Okay, so you say that I only look for the faults within the organization because I have an axe to ground and I never see the good. And when I said that that's because, in my opinion, the bad outweighs the good, you said, well, that's because you're only seeing what you want to see. Now, since leaving the organization, I've tried very hard to prevent myself from living in a bubble the way I did while I was in the organization. When it comes to anything, politics, religion, science, history, I try to understand where people are coming from when they're expressing their views. In fact, a good rule of thumb that I try and live by is that if you cannot argue your opponent's position just as well, if not better than they can, then chances are you shouldn't be arguing the subject. A lot of times this is referred to as steelmanning your opponent's arguments. This means creating the strongest and most charitable version of your opponent's argument so that you can dismantle that instead of creating what is called a straw man, which is a weak and often distorted version of your opponent's argument that is easily destroyed, but it doesn't really address the main issues that your opponent has. I say all that to say that I have tried to give the organization the most charitable interpretation I possibly can. In fact, while I was still in the organization and I was studying about it and starting to deconstruct from my faith, I was trying desperately to hold on to my faith and my belief system. So I was actually biased in the opposite direction. I was trying to deny negative things about the organization because I desperately wanted it to be true. But anyway, I created a list of 5 things that I feel encompass the most positives about the organization, or the most positive that I would have listed while I was in the organization. But like I said, each of these supposed positives also comes with a negative. Number 1, the sense of community that you get being a Jehovah's Witness. Looking back, some of the best and strongest friendships that I had were formed within the witness organization with other Jehovah's Witnesses. And it felt really good to feel like I had a sense of community. In fact, we would brag that if you go to another country, you can always find Jehovah's Witnesses and they're going to take you in and they'll take care of you and they'll be kind to you. And as someone who has traveled out of the country and met Jehovah's Witnesses in other countries, I can say that this is partially true. Although I also found that this was true for non-Jehovah's Witnesses. I received a lot of help and kindness from non-Jehovah's Witnesses when I was in countries where I didn't even speak the language, and yet the people went out of their way to assist me. And some of the Jehovah's Witnesses in those congregations also helped me. But the problem with the community and the friendships that you form within the organization is that it is extremely conditional. And those conditions are that you remain loyal to the organization and never express disagreement with the opinions of the governing body. If you do something that they have deemed inappropriate, such as like express disagreement with the leaders or take a blood transfusion, you will be disfellowshipped. That loving community that you have will disappear overnight. And the only way that you can get that back is to pretend to believe things that you don't believe are true. Essentially, they demand that you lie and say, yes, I believe that this is true, and I believe that this is the correct organization, in order to get your friends and family back. Which gets to the next point, which is moral instruction. I hardly find it moral to blackmail someone with the loss of their friends and family, or blackmail someone who has already left the organization with never being able to see their friends and family again if they don't agree to toe the line. And we already hinted at it before, but the organization also defines morality as not taking blood transfusions and other medical treatments that involve certain blood fractions, as well as a litany of other rules and guidelines that are in many cases not even biblical. They are just the opinions of the governing body. And again, if you express disagreement with any of these things, you will lose your friends and family. I've said this before, but most of the moral instruction that you receive as a Jehovah's Witness is also given in like children's Saturday morning cartoons. And speaking of morality, we have the hope for the future. Now, this is a big one for me because when I was in the organization, that was one of the things that was the hardest to let go of, was this sense that, oh, we're going to be able to live forever in a paradise. I'm not even going to pretend like the loss of that wasn't something that deeply affected me. And let's pretend for a second that the paradise that Jehovah's Witnesses talk about is actually a real thing. Because there's also the issue of forgoing all of the things that you want to do and serving an organization for your entire life with the hopes of achieving some sort of reward in the end that isn't even real. But as I said, let's pretend that it is real. The hope that Jehovah's Witnesses are looking forward to is the destruction of everyone on earth that isn't a Jehovah's Witness. According to witness theology, if you're not a loyal member of the organization, when Armageddon comes, you will be killed by God. And after the earth is cleansed of all the wicked people, aka non-Jehovah's Witnesses, then God will help build the paradise and resurrect all of the people throughout history who never had a chance to learn about Jehovah's Witnesses, or the people who didn't die at Armageddon, because if you die at Armageddon, you have no chance of resurrection, according to their theology. You might consider that a great prospect for the future, but I don't. I don't believe that it's moral to look forward to the slaughter of men, women, and children for the crime of not believing that the governing body was selected by God in 1919 as his sole channel of communication. Which gets to the next point, which is the belief that you are helping others by going out in the preaching work and warning them about this coming destruction. Because after all, if you don't warn these people and then they die at Armageddon, then God will consider you blood guilty and hold you accountable for those lives, and then you will also die at Armageddon. None of that, in my opinion, seems moral or just. And last but not least, we have believing that you have/are teaching the truth. Now, this is the most difficult one because despite the fact that you can prove conclusively that a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses beliefs are like categorically false, like the 1914 teaching, the 1919 teaching, their teaching on the other sheep, their teachings regarding the anointed and like who is selected as God's children, that kind of thing. All of those things you can prove that witnesses are incorrect about. But because biblical interpretation is so finicky and subjective, even if you showed someone all of the evidence to prove that what they believe is false, they're still going to hold on to that belief no matter what, most of the time. In fact, you could show Jehovah's Witness 10 times over that something is false and what they believe is wrong, and they will still deny it. And then if the governing body a week later comes out with an article that says all of the exact same things you said, and they're saying, oh, we've adjusted our understanding, then they'll accept it. Because they don't base their interpretation of the Bible on the Bible, they base their interpretation of the Bible on whatever the governing body tells them they're supposed to believe. I can't tell you how many people have been disfellowshipped for apostasy for saying, I cannot teach this because I do not believe it's true. And then a decade later, 20 years later, 30 years later, their organization produces an article and they get rid of that teaching that the person objected to. So was that person just supposed to knowingly teach what they knew wasn't true for 10, 20, 30 years? And are they supposed to teach those things that they know aren't true just so that they can maintain their relationships with their family? And if you are supposed to pattern your behavior off of Jesus, if you are really a Christian, do you believe that Jesus would have said, okay, it's good for us to teach lies and for me to continue teaching that something that I know isn't true, and, they'll get it right eventually? Or do you think Jesus would have said, no, I refuse to teach this and I'm not going to belong to an organization that teaches what I know isn't true? Also, as bad as it is to support an organization that's teaching things that you know aren't true, it's even worse to support an organization that you know is covering up the abuse of children. As much as the organization likes to try to deny it or claim that it's just apostate lies, the organization has had a terrible track record of child abuse. In fact, I could make entire videos on the child abuse and the cover-ups, and I don't have time to get into all of that. But suffice it to say, someone who was abused by the organization should have every right to leave that organization without having to lose all of their friends and family. And they should be able to speak out about that organization without that fear as well. And that goes for anyone else who doesn't want to be a part of an organization that is guilty of these things. Anyway, sorry the video was so long. I hope it was informative. Let me know if you have any other questions.